Hey, welcome back. It's Cowboy Gold Hunter. I got a great video for you today. So a few months ago, back in May, I did part one of the Washington State Golden Fish Pamphlet, where I went over without timing restrictions. Well, now it's July, and a lot of the other rules are going to start coming into play. So this is part two of the Washington State Golden Fish Pamphlet, where I'm going to go over the with timing restrictions area. Just a few quick things before we get into this section. Make sure you look at part one where I go through without timing restrictions. A lot of the same rules apply with the with timing restrictions, but there are some subtle differences which I'll touch upon in just a couple seconds. Now, also, make sure you check out the comments section on part one and part two. They will mirror each other, and I will put a pinned comment down. It's just going to be an area where we can keep up to date with new rules and regulations and updates if any come down the pipeline. That way we can all be informed and follow the rules correctly. All right, with timing restrictions. At the top of page 14, it states that you may mineral prospect in the freshwaters of the state only during the authorized times given on the tables that start on page 18. Now, this is the first big difference between without timing restrictions and with timing restrictions. Without timing restrictions, that's all year. You can go in the creek all year round, but you cannot take material from the wetter perimeter. That's where the active water is flowing down. Now, in this rule set is saying that you can work in the water, but only during specific times with timing restrictions. Also, you have to have this book on you at all times at the job site. That's another difference from the other rule set. You don't need to have this book with you. I say keep it with you just to have it so you can look at the rules and understand them. Also, you still cannot use any motorized equipment or any gravity siphons. So what does that mean when it states that you're only allowed to work within a wetter perimeter during authorized times? That all starts on page 18 and it goes to the back of the book. It lists every county in Washington State with a bunch of creeks per county. So let's look at Ferry County on page 22, and in particular, Granite Creek. It states that between June 16th and September 30th, we're only allowed to work within the wetter perimeter during those times. That's actively taking material out of where the water is flowing. Now, say you're on a creek that's not listed under Ferry County. There's a whole bunch of creeks out there, right? There's a general date for Ferry County that states July 1st through August 31st. So if you're on a no-name creek that's not on this list, those are the only times you're allowed to work within a wetter perimeter for that creek. That's the biggest difference between without timing restrictions. You don't have to follow this table. You can work on your favorite creek year-round as long as you're not pulling any material out of the wetter perimeter. You can definitely pull it from the frequent scour zone, which is considered the bank. Rule 1 states you're only authorized to use non-motorized equipment and tools that are handheld for use in mineral prospecting. And they give you a list down below in section A and B of what those are. I'll show you. Rule 1A states that we're allowed to use pans and we can use sluices, and this includes non-motorized concentrators, high bankers, and rocker boxes. And they have to have a riffle area totaling 10 square feet or less. So for me, it's from the top to the bottom because it's all a riffle area. Also, you're only allowed to use natural stream flow or pouring buckets into your sluices or your high bankers. You can't use a gravity siphon. So now let's look at the definitions and see what a gravity siphon and what other non-motorized equipment means. This section I got tons of comments on part one, and the comments were always about if I can use an electric recirculating pump for my high banker that's outside of the frequent scour zone or the wetted perimeter, where I can recirculate the water inside of my container or bucket and not have to pour water into it each time to get some flow. I'm still in contact with WDFW to get that answer, and as soon as I get the answer, I will put it as a pinned comment on part one and part two to let you guys know. But let's read what a gravity siphon is according to their definition on page 8. It says any prospecting or mining activity that uses water drawn into a hose, pipe, or tube via the effects of gravity or siphon to excavate, concentrate, or process aggregate. This is a second question that I'm going to ask them once I get in contact with them. And that is, those suction tubes that I made last year, those things work awesome and I want to be able to use those, But by definition, it almost seems like I can't even use that to pull material out of the weather perimeter. So I'm going to get that answer here as well. Now for handheld mineral prospecting tools, right below that it states tools used for mineral prospecting that are held by hand and do not have moving parts powered in whole or in part by internal combustion, electricity, hydraulics, or pneumatics. Examples include, but are not necessarily limited to, shovels, picks, trowels, hammers, and pry bars. So just by that definition alone, it seems like we can't use those electric recirculating pumps, but that's why I want to get clarification so we're all in the know and we do it right. Now the second rule states that your sluice cannot be 25% of the width of the weather perimeter when you put it in the creek, and that's at its widest point. So that's right here for me. So as you can obviously see, I'm well below the 25%. Rule 3 states that we cannot use any vehicle mounted winches, but we can use non-motorized handheld winches to move boulders or large woody material that is not embedded in the perimeter. So we can move this boulder out of the way because it's not embedded with a non-motorized handheld winch, and then we can keep it stabilized with ropes, chains, anything else necessary, keep it from falling down on top of us. Now when we're done, we want to make sure and release those chains and ropes and try and put it back in the same spot. Rule 4 is all about equipment separation. So this is like if you have a buddy out there with you or you're working by yourself, there are some rules that come with equipment and how far you can work between each other. Now for 4A, it states that if you have a sluice box that has a riffle area less than 3 square feet, and that includes gained equipment, you can work as close to your buddy as you want. They can have their sluice box right next to you, as long as they are below the 3 square feet. Now rule 4B, this is a rule about being inside the weather perimeter when you have equipment like a sluice, whatever I said prior, that has a riffle area exceeding 3 square feet, and that includes gained equipment. Now if you're working with a buddy, you guys have to have a 200-foot separation around you guys between each active piece of equipment. Now say your buddy's working here and you have your setup right here, but it's not in use, that's totally fine. It's only the equipment that's actively in use. You have to be 200 feet away from each other. Rule 4C is almost exactly like Rule 4B, but now our equipment is out of the weather perimeter and on the frequent scour zone, but our tailings and our water discharge is still going into the weather perimeter. This is for equipment that exceeds 3 square feet for our riffle area, and you cannot work within 200 feet again of another active person mineral prospecting. Now again, if your buddy's right next to you and his is set up but you're only using yours, that's totally fine. It's just active mineral prospecting. Rule 5 states that you may work within the weather perimeter or the frequent scour zone only during these authorized times, where it's 1/2 hour before official sunrise and 1/2 hour after official sunset. It also states that if your equipment exceeds 1/2 the width of the weather perimeter of the stream, you must remove that equipment from the weather perimeter or move it so that a minimum of 50% of the weather perimeter is free of equipment between 1/2 hour after official sunset to 1/2 hour prior to official sunrise. So if you have a much smaller stream like the one I have here and your equipment exceeds that 50%, they just want to make sure 50% of the stream is free of equipment during these work times. Rule 6 states that you may not excavate, collect, remove, or process aggregate within 400 feet of any fishway, dam, or hatchery water intake. Rule 7, you must not disturb any existing fish habitat improvement structures or steam channel improvements. Okay, Rule 8 states that you cannot undermine, move, or disturb large woody material embedded in the slopes or located wholly or partially within the weather perimeter. Now, if you're in the frequent scour zone, which is right here, you can move large woody material and boulders that are embedded from the frequent scour zone, but you must keep them within the frequent scour zone. You can't put them in the weather perimeter, and you cannot cut large woody material. Rule 9 states that we cannot remove or disturb or cut any type of woody vegetation that is live rooted into your bank like this. You just can't touch it. Rule 10 states that you can work in one excavation site at a time. You can have up to 2 if one's being used as a settling pond. This was my settling pond, but the creek dried up, so now I have to fill it in. And you can have multiple people working at that single excavation site. Rule 11 states that when you're done using your excavation sites, you need to fill them back in and level all your tailing piles. I have a tailing pile back here. Since my pond dried up, I have to come back and fill it back in again. Rule 12 states that you cannot excavate, collect, or remove aggregate from the toe of the slope. It also says that you cannot do those things on an unstable slope where the possibility of sediment can run down on your frequent scour zone or your wetted perimeter. Rule 13 states that you're allowed to partially divert water with rocks and stuff like that into your mineral prospecting equipment as long as the dam doesn't exceed 50% of the wetted perimeter, and that includes the width of your sluice. And you cannot divert the water outside of the wetted perimeter, so it has to be all inside of this area. Rule 14 states that you're only allowed to use materials from the wetted perimeter to construct your partially made dam by hand, or you can use artificial materials from outside of the wetted perimeter as your partial dam. And when you're done with it, you have to make sure you remove all that material and try and put it back to its original placement. Okay, Rule 15 is kind of lengthy, so I'm going to read it and try and interpret what they're trying to say here. So you may process aggregate collected from the frequent scour zone, right here. And processing aggregate, according to the definition on page 10, is the physical or mechanical separation of the valuable mineral content within the aggregate. Now, 15A states, at any location if you use pans, mini rocker boxes, non-motorized mini high bankers, or sluices or other non-motorized concentrators with riffle areas totaling 3 square feet or less, including gained equipment. So you can process equipment and collect it from anywhere over here and run it inside of the wetted perimeter, any location that you want, as long as you're 3 square feet or less on your riffle area. Rule 15B states that you may process aggregate collected from the frequent scour zone only in the frequent scour zone or upland areas landward of the frequent scour zone if you use non-motorized high bankers or with riffle areas totaling 10 square feet or less, including gained equipment, or sluices or rocker boxes that have riffle areas totaling more than 3 square feet but less than 10 square feet, including gained equipment. You may not discharge tailings to the wetted perimeter when using this equipment. However, you may discharge wastewater to the wetted perimeter if its entry point into the wetted perimeter is at least 200 feet from any other wastewater discharge entry point. Did you get all that? Because I sure as heck did not. Just read that section and interpret it the best you can. I found a typo. It says Rule 15 is the next one, but actually it's Rule 16. We already did 15. And this one states that you may process aggregate collected from the upland areas landward of the frequent scour zone. I take that as this area up here. Frequent scour zone, slope, upland areas of the frequent scour zone. And it states there on 16A, at any location if you use pans, sluices, non-motorized concentrators, mini rocker boxes, and non-motorized mini high bankers with riffle areas totaling 3 square feet or less, including gained equipment, you must classify the aggregate at the collection or excavation site up here prior to processing with this equipment within the wetted perimeter or frequent scour zone. So basically, if you take it from up here, you gotta process and classify it up here before you can run it in the frequent scour zone or the wetted perimeter. 16B also states only at an upland location landward of the frequent scour zone, if you use non-motorized high bankers or rocker boxes, you may not discharge tailings or wastewater into the wetted perimeter or frequent scour zone. So make sure you're plenty far away that your water will not go into these areas. 16C is kind of saying the exact same thing as I read in 16A. It states word for word, within the wetted perimeter or frequent scour zone, if you use a sluice with a riffle area greater than 3 square feet, you must classify the aggregate at the collection or excavation site prior to processing. That's again with dealing with areas outside of the frequent scour zone in the upward land area. I just want to point out real quick, I know it's hard to hear someone talk and read things off, but a lot of this information is very specific and I want to make sure I don't miss anything or say anything wrong, okay? So I apologize for reading some of these rules. We're almost done, but that's just the way it's going to be on this video. Rules 17, 18, and 19 are pretty self-explanatory. If you come into contact with any freshwater live mussels, you're supposed to leave that area, go to a new site. If you encounter any fish, reds, or fish life, you also want to make sure and move that to a different area. And then if you observe a fish kill, you're supposed to report that to WDFW. So there you go, folks. That's part 2 of the Washington State Golden Fish Pamphlet. I really hope you enjoyed the content. As you saw, there's little differences between part 1 and part 2 with and without timing restrictions. Mainly the equipment that you can use, larger, 10 square feet or less, and you can actually work within the wetted perimeter during those authorized times. Everything else is basically the same with just small differences. If you like the content, please drop a thumbs up. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, if I interpreted the rules wrong, please let me know. This is a place where we can learn from each other so we follow the rules correctly. Also, subscribing is free and it goes a long way to help my channel out a lot so I can produce content that's fun and engaging for you guys at home. Again, thanks for watching, and I hope you find gold on your next adventure.